think the key question comes down to, are they interchangeable? Are biosimilars and innovators interchangeable? And we know what the regulators say about interchangeability, particularly the FDA, that there should be no difference between continuing the innovator compared to having repeated switches between drugs. So you could go from A to B to A to B, A to B, and back and forth, and there is no difference in efficacy, safety, or immunogenicity. And even if there are minor differences between the drugs, we know that they're not identical. But does that stress to the immune system provoke an immunogenic reaction, potentially more anti-drug antibodies, or it even impacts clinical efficacy? So if just take the argument that we have, innovator and one biosimilar, I think what we need to see to designate interchangeability and really true confidence is a multi-switch study where, again, you could take a stable patient who's on innovator or even on biosimilar to start with, and switch and do multiple switches. Potentially 3 switches, I think, would be the minimum. I think the ideal study would do at least three switches, maybe up to 5, and probably using not a clinical endpoint as a primary endpoint. I think I'd like to see probably PK as a primary endpoint, and anti-drug antibody formation. I think the clinical indices would be secondary endpoints. If I was going to choose between Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, just being biased to IBD here, I think I'd choose ulcerative colitis as a more homogeneous population. We know that Crohn's has all its problems in clinical trials as a heterogeneous disease. And all the things I'd like to see in the secondary endpoints here are endoscopy, particularly as we know how to assess endoscopy properly, and remission and response, and all the things that we're used to seeing in a UC trial. I think beyond that, I think the challenges become, and I think the thing that we're all worried about downstream for our patients, and this is why both clinicians and patients need to be the decision makers in what the patient gets, not the payers and the regulators and non-medical switching, is that there won't be long before there's a second biosimilar in Canada, potentially towards the end of this year. So you can imagine a patient who's gone from innovator, they've already been switched to biosimilar 1, and then perhaps they've moved to another area, or their payer decision or their insurer makes them go on to the next cheapest option, which is biosimilar 2. And I think that's the ultimate stress on the immune system, where you do have minor changes in each of these 3 products, and is that safe and effective to do? Is anyone ever going to design a study where you go from innovator to biosimilar 1 to 2 to 3 and they're switching? Well, perhaps. I don't think it's I don't think it's unfeasible that a couple of years or 5 years from now that situation will arise.
Do you have any thoughts about what really should be the minimum requirement for clinical or peer-reviewed sort of data to support the next wave of biosimilars in the market?
Yeah, well, I think the bare minimum study is a study to designate interchangeability. So a multi-switch study, even between one biosimilar and the parent drug. Beyond that, I think it's very important, both as prescribers and for patients, to be aware that we shouldn't advocate non-medical switching in any way. And if a patient's already had one switch, that they stay on the drug that they've switched to, and under no circumstances are they forced to switch to a different biosimilar, because I don't think we will ever know what that does, and I don't think we can ever set up a study to test all those eventualities. So I think these, whether we're talking about the bio-naive patient or the switching patient, the physician should have the ultimate say in prescribing the drug in discussion with the patient and in agreement with the patient, until there's really robust data to say that you can switch between multiple biosimilars. And I find I can't imagine that a study will ever answer that.
Good point. And also, of course, we function in a publicly funded healthcare system, and we have federal, provincial regulations. So do you have any thoughts about how a lot of, I think, what we do is going to be driven by provincial policy around prescribing and particularly specific to the biosimilar? So is that what's going to be driving this? Do you think provincial policy as it evolves on this subject is going to be what drives our prescribing behaviors?
I think it's inevitable in the world that we live in, and come back to the fundamental principles. I think we all agree that biosimilars are a good thing. Anything that saves healthcare expenditure is a good thing, and if it improves accessibility, then we're all advocates of that. Absolutely. I think you're right. Payers and policies will influence whether, as a first-line drug, we are prescribing an innovator or a biosimilar, and it may well be. I think the situation will be here soon, and it already is in some provinces, that the first choice will be a biosimilar. But again, I think both as physicians and patients, we'd like to have a choice, and there may be situations where you may not want that to be the case, and I think there has to remain choice, and I think patients are important advocates of this too.
We're encouraged, I think, that we're seeing these data come, and that we know there are more data coming, but I think our bar remains high. We all want to see more. We want to see better trials. We want to see further trials, and I think we will want to see some of these trials reproduced with other biosimilars as they enter the market. We've outlined already that probably the highest risk scenario where you really want to see robust data is switching a stable patient from innovator to a biosimilar, or conversely from biosimilar innovator, or even from one biosimilar to another. So I think we've had a good discussion. I thank my guest for his thoughts and contributions. The CARE faculty are going to be hosting regional meetings, regional congresses on this topic of biosimilars. We recently held a national congress on this topic, attended by a variety of stakeholders, including payers, both public and private, pharmaceutical companies, patient advocacy groups as well. And we're going to have a series of regional meetings which are quite similar. The first is scheduled in Calgary on October 19th from 5 to 9 p.m. Second will be taking place in London, Ontario on October 27th from noon till 4:30 p.m. And the third will be happening in Montreal, and those dates have yet to be confirmed. And I would encourage any of you watching this video to visit the CARE website, which is www.careeducation.ca, in order to find out details about these meetings, and if you're interested, certainly to register to attend.